From across time and space and throughout the multiverse, listen as multiple generations of geeks come together to discuss the iconic characters, events, and franchises that make up the very fabric of pop culture as we know it. Let Your Geek Side Show presents Then and Now. Hey guys, this is Kitty.
And this is Andy.
And we are coming to you from the Sideshow Studios in Southern California. This week, our mission is to go back in time to discuss the origins of a sci-fi franchise that is as relentless as Skynet itself. Since its debut in 1984, these films have continued to upgrade themselves as newer, sleeker models as technology and theater-going audiences evolve over the years. Relentless in its pursuit of the future, these films imagine the mettle of man pitted against the menace of the machine, asking questions about fate and free will. Are we in control of our own destinies? Or is destruction the programmed outcome of our actions in every timeline? Come with us if you want to live. This is the Terminator Then and Now. All right. Andy, thank you so much for joining me this week to talk about Terminator.
It's my pleasure.
So Terminator is a franchise that you yourself have quite a bit of experience with as a fan.
Yeah, I guess it was a big part of my life when I was a kid, and it's kind of held my interest all the way through to my elder years right now.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for the Terminator.
Excellent. Well, I think this is going to make for an interesting discussion because, as we all know, I hope, Terminator 2 is called Judgment Day, and my Judgment Day came from the fact that I have just watched T2 for the first time in my life this week, and actually saw Dark Fate first, and that was my first Terminator film. So coming from a perspective of, have you seen all of them, or have you seen a number of them?
I think the only thing I haven't watched is the TV show.
Okay.
The Sarah Connor Chronicles. Everything else I think I've watched. But I should say, though, that's not a judgment. That's cool. I'm kind of enjoying the fact that you've came at this franchise from another angle. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking forward to hearing your take on these characters because it's kind of cool. I think that you've seen a different story arc to Sarah to me.
I've seen her go backwards, which is almost like, there's a lot of time travel involved in these films. So it is a very interesting perspective. So then in the interest of time travel and getting back to the start of the timeline, Terminator 1, what are those things that you think set a standard for this franchise? I mean, there have been so many additional entries, but there's something about that first 1 and 2. But
oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, that one I've got a lot of fond memories of it. It was probably one of the earliest movies I can remember just being genuinely terrified by, but in a thrilling way.
Okay.
I think up until that point, as a kid and getting into my teenage years, something was either cool or scary. That and Aliens were the first films that I thought were scary and cool at the same time, And
thanks, James Cameron.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Cheers, James. But yeah, we started off with those two movies, Aliens and Terminator, on VHS back in the day, and me and my buddy Paul watched them back to back to back to back. And I think what made Terminator difference was that relentlessness. There's been chase movies. There's loads of cool chase movies, but there was something about this unstoppable nature. It's got kind of that zombie vibe,
Yeah.
But you feel from the outset that she's never going to escape this thing. You can't see how she can win, and that is that's compelling.
Yeah, I found myself watching with T2. There were a couple of scenes where I was out of breath. I was like, seriously, this thing is. And first of all, hearing Arnold Schwarzenegger say mimetic polyalloy in his accent was like a delight. But yeah, there was a certain breathlessness to some of those chase scenes that even held up. And Dark Fate, the action scenes were on a lot bigger scale, but I appreciated something about the almost intimacy of the chases in T2 that did leave me feel like I too was getting exhausted by the chases.
Yeah, there's definitely a science to a chase movie, whether you're looking at a slow stalker horror movie, whether you're looking at Halloween or something like that, or something like Terminator 2, where there's got to be points for character progression, and there's got to be points for the audience just to breathe and reset, because they can just get overwhelmed. And Terminator is probably the best example, I think, of it in almost every version. There's different ways of breaking that tension, different ways of adding humor just so the audience can laugh uncomfortably and have a little moment.
Yeah.
Terminator 2 did that really well. The comedy in that was great. and it was necessary.
I was actually surprised by some of those moments of levity, but it was interesting looking at John Connor from the context of like I'm a young adult woman, but like this was like a teenage little boy who just found out that the robot has to do everything he says, and he was like so excited. And then I was like, of course, the first thing that he would do is teach it to swear or like teach it like the lingo, which was equally like delightful just listening to Arnold Schwarzenegger. That was a great casting choice because just the way he is, his own like demeanor, he had that very like machine like quality, which is very like, which is not a diss in any way. Like it was a very interesting and fabulous choice. I mean, like,
yeah, we've always been a really big admirer of Schwarzenegger, and especially in the Terminator movies, he brought a lot of subtlety to his performance that I think people overlook. Mm-hmm. You know, the sheer nature of being still. Being a dead-eyed machine, mm-hmm. You know, how many actors want to chew the scenery? They want to be the master of every scene. He had to dominate it with physical presence alone, mm-hmm. You know, and that's just not because he's a big dude. Mm-hmm. You know, you can see some big dude movies where those guys suck, but he's so good at dominating every scene, and he seems genuinely intimidating. Mm-hmm. And I saw I'm maybe jumping forward a bit, but I had a really excellent Q&A with Gabriel Luna where he was talking specifically about that.
Mm-hmm. About being the Rev 9 in Dark
the mannerisms that he wanted to take from Arnold and that he wanted to take from the T-1000.
I was just about to say, watching the T-800 and the T-1000 last night, I watched it last night in prep for the podcast. I just outed myself. My bad. There was something very like, because I don't know the actor who played the T-1000, but he had a very liquid quality to his movements, his stalking. It was very smooth, shadowy, and then you've got the giant wall of muscle that you know what the endoskeleton looks like inside. And the physicality of the actors was fantastic. And then when you get Gabe Luna in Dark Fate as the Rev 9, who can do both of those things, like that was absolutely fascinating. First of all, but there were some like. The way that he would move his head or his eyes, but then his limbs and the way he stalked, like he very much embodied both the hard endoskeleton and the liquid outside.
Yeah, I mean, I only just recently found out. I think it was a Collider article I was reading where they said that Gabe mocapped both roles.
Oh wow!
So he was I think they called it the Easter Bunny or something was their name for it, but he was the exoskeleton as well as the
the
physical
Easter Bunny. That's delightful and terrifying.
But it's something that and I've watched that movie a few times now. I really enjoyed the design of the Rev 9 and the way that it's the exoskeleton is hollow. It's just a container for the Terminator goop inside. Yeah. You know, and the performances of the two are very different. Mm-hmm. And I think it's in that way his physical performance as well is a really interesting sequel to Terminator 2 and the way that the evolution of those timelines version of Terminators have gone, you know.
Yeah, and so it was really interesting for me going back. So I started with Dark Fate, and the 80s action badass ladies, those are like, they're all like characters that I know. I feel like I know even if I haven't seen all of their films. Like I haven't also seen Halloween, and I've been given loving teases about that from other staff here. But Aliens, that's the one that was my franchise. Like everyone kind of has theirs. And so like Ripley and Sarah Connor and Laurie Strode and like seeing all these characters. So seeing Linda Hamilton in as her older self was incredibly awesome. But having it was different context for me watching her be sad. There will be spoilers for Dark Fate here, just so you guys know if you haven't already caught on. But like seeing her at the very introduction of the film, you get the clip from Judgment Day, and then you see the Terminator who didn't get the memo and still kills John Connor, and then she's so depressed, and then just watching her evolution, and I've watched her go backwards. So I got to the end of T2 and it was like, oh, this is a nice hopeful moment, and oh man, like I know what comes next. Like it was really difficult because I really liked where she had gotten to at the end of T2, but I also really liked seeing her be grandma badass in Dark Fate.
Oh, Sarah Connor, I think, is one of the greatest action characters ever written, and seeing her evolve, seeing her adapt and overcome and change. She goes from what's essentially like a final girl in a horror movie through to owning her fate, to taking these moments and deciding that she's not going to take this, you know. And I loved it, and I enjoyed. Obviously, some spoilers. I enjoyed seeing the fate of John, because it was never John's movie to me. Much as I loved that character as a teenager, it's Sarah's movie, and her motivations are very interesting. You know, even her relationship with the other characters in Dark Fate. You know, her first reaction is, "Oh, she's me. She's me." And then it's like, "Oh no, she's John." Everything has to be about her. Yeah. Because it's consumed her entire life since she was a teenage girl. Yeah. She doesn't know anything else.
I loved that moment where she's like, where she kind of shows her hand and she's like, "Oh, Danielle has to be the Mother Mary now because I'm the Mother Mary," and Mother Mary loses her son for the fate of everyone. But then, yeah, that realization that she was bitter that her role was to lose, but I think then that it totally, like, John's resistance is in the future. Like, that was his, but like her resistance in that moment, like she might not be the leader of a huge rebellion, but what she's doing against the machines in those moments where they come for her is equally important to the story. I totally agree that, like, what I was waiting for her to show up in T2. I was like, come on, where is she? Where is she? But I also noticed it was very, very interesting, I think, because Aliens is my thing. And both of those, Aliens and T2, were James Cameron films. I thought it was very interesting that the formula for several very important sci-fi franchises are a woman who is extremely tactical and knows what she's doing, fights one lone threat that is like relentless. And then in the second movie, everybody calls her crazy until, guess what? The thing comes back and she told you so, and she has to take everyone down. But I thought it was very interesting that like two major sci-fi heroines are downplayed until they have to save everyone's butts again from the same thing that came for them the first time.
Yeah, and the thing that they're being hounded by is on a whole new level. You know, that I at the time I remember going. I snuck into the theater to go see T2. I was too young to see it, and I remember thinking, like, how are they going to top this? And I would have been happy if it was just the same movie again. If it was just the same cast, older, cool. I just wanted to see more Terminator. And seeing how they changed it was so mind-blowing at the time. There was nothing really like it. And I hate to be the old fart being nostalgic about it, but it was super cool. And at the time, I think nobody was prepared for that movie. And seeing how Sarah had changed was utterly unexpected. Everyone was blown away. Like, I've got friends and relatives who I've talked to about this who are like, "Oh, and then you saw her arms, and women didn't look like that." Like, oh my God. I loved the scene where I think it was the first one that she was shown in, when they're like surveying all the people in the like high security wing of Pescadero, and she's just been exercising. She is panting. I don't even think she has a bra on. Like, she's got her tank top is all sweaty, and she's just like, "Hey, what's up?" And I was just like, oh my God, like women didn't get to be like that in a lot of films. Like, and so you had the action heroine who isn't like standing there waiting like, "Hey, what's up?" It's like she's just finished working out because she's gonna kick somebody's ass. It's just a matter of whose. I think from every Terminator movie that Sarah's in, she is doing something unexpected. You know, the first movie, she's absolutely the final girl, but it isn't that moment that, like, most horror movies, it's right at the end. They have that rise up moment and they conquer the beast, and there's usually some shitty after credit bit where they come out again and it's final girl. But pretty early on in Terminator, she just goes, "Nope, I am not standing for this." And seeing that's unexpected. And then in the next movie you see her and she's completely different.
Now you mentioned when you went to the theater and you're like, how are they going to top this? Watching T2, I when they're like, oh, 2 people have been sent back, and you see the arrival of Arnold Schwarzenegger, and then you see the T-1000 as you learn. But I know in the first film he's the bad guy, and in the second film he's the helper. So pop culture has kind of taken that moment from me. But when you went to see that and they do that whole opening sequence where he shoots up he takes on all the bikers in the bar, and he's like, you think, like, were you meant to think he was still the villain and then that the other guy was going to be the helper? Because then the other guy dresses a police officer.
I had a different experience. I'm English, and I was young. I didn't have access to the internet. Mm-hmm. I knew nothing about this movie going in. I hadn't seen a trailer for it. I just saw the posters, and there was the buzz of people wanting to see this movie. So I went in completely cold. I saw the Terminator, and I'm like, okay, that's the villain. Mm-hmm. Okay. I saw the other guy and just thought, oh, there's two villains. That's how they topped it. So I didn't think they had any help from the future. I thought the only way they could top Terminator was make two Terminators happen.
What's worse than one robot? Two robots.
So it completely took me by surprise.
Okay, yeah, because
a lot of the technology that they used in the movie, a lot of the CGI was something I'd never seen before.
And it held up surprisingly well. It's like, with that context of like, this is an 80s film, like I was impressed by a lot of the effects they were able to do. And also some of the stuff where I'm like, this is good old practical blood and guts. Like that, oh my God, when people got like, when he stabbed people through like stabbed Sarah through the shoulder and like, oh my God.
And that was insanely visceral. Mm-hmm. I think that... I feel almost bad spoiling any first Terminator movie stuff for you, because I love that you're experiencing this for the first time. But
and backwards.
Well, why not? That's kind of cool. And there are a lot of points where something just really grim happens to people in all of these movies, and it's not necessarily overly graphic. There's just, I think Cameron has a good understanding about what makes you squirm, what makes you wince.
Yeah.
It's things that you can relate to, you know. Anyone who's ever got a piece of grit stuck in their eye is going to squirm when anything goes near their eyeball. Mm-hmm. You know, everyone's had a paper cut, so you freak out every time someone gets sliced. And he doesn't do much that's... Like, I mean, you've got your big action movie moments, but a lot of his stuff is grounded in things that's genuinely going to make you gasp in the movie theater. And the physical stunts that he chose to do. I mean, I remember as a kid losing my mind when he jumped that Harley with the kid on the front. And I know that nowadays people are like, oh, you can tell it's a stuntman and he's wearing a mask. And I'm like, I couldn't at the time. It broke my brain. I thought that Arnie just jumped a Harley and it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in my life.
Yeah. Now, we've got the badass humans and then we've got the really cool robots. And we've seen, I mean, I thought it was so fascinating that when John Connor's like, what are you? Like, and he's poking him and he's like, I'm living tissue over a metal endoskeleton. So you've got something that is alive and then something that is mechanical. But because the internal workings, what we cannot see is the mechanical, and like can't trust anything, you can't see its brain, it makes it so odious. But I really liked, and I wish we had gotten a little bit more time with the concept of Grace in Dark Fate, combining the human and the machine, but in a way that benefits the human. I mean, it's no secret for people who know me, I take a really big interest in cyborgs in general, in science fiction. And so it's interesting that we've got the Terminator is technically a cyborg, but it doesn't have the right mix of parts for us to think like this is an ally. But we have a character who, she doesn't have a programmed mission, but she chose and doesn't deviate from her conviction it's a human choice she makes, Grace, to go back in time and protect Danny. But she has those Terminator-based advancements she's got the strength, the durability, but only in short bursts, like coupled with human fatigue and physical limitations. And so I was wondering if you had any reactions to that character. I thought she was great, and I wish we had a little more time with that concept of like, why are we okay with humans using the machine parts like this, but then the cyborgs, I mean, obviously because they want to kill us, but like, you know?
I was really fascinated by Grace. I liked her a lot. I thought the performance was really cool. But what I was really interested in, and again, something I wished we'd had more time with, was when you've got a humanity that's become like crushed by these things, the moment, what it took for her to choose to become, and I've forgotten the term they used for it, the enhanced, was it?
Yeah, I think so.
She was literally at death's door and she didn't want to stop her mission.
And you see that more as because like with the Terminator, when he's like, this is my mission, like whatever it is, whether it's to the detriment or to the benefit of John Connor, he's like, this is my mission, I cannot deviate from it. She had the human choice. Like at any point she could have tapped out if she wanted, but her conviction was her mission. And she's like, my moral code or my whatever I believe in my heart is going to make me not give up on this. So I thought it was a very interesting thing where we get these cool mirrors of like the humans have this choice and they don't want to give up and that's their mission. But because the robot is programmed with it, it's seen as inherently evil. Like I thought it was such a fascinating, I wish we had a little more time in the future there. Like what would push someone to the point, and when did the humans start to say we can use the machines to our benefit? Because that's a thing that like we go, oh, I need my cell phone to be fast and the internet to be connected at all times and blah, blah, blah. And I thought there were some interesting repercussions to that because the Rev 9 could track them so much more easily. Like it wasn't even like, I'm going to call them on a landline phone, which I thought was a great scene with the voice mimicking. But like there's drones and there's security, CCTV everywhere. Like he can tap into that. And so at what point do we say we want the technology to do all of these things for us? But then it becomes it's either a benefit or a detriment.
That's interesting. You've kind of split my brain there in two different ways. The first thing you're going to have to watch Salvation. I think there's some interesting stuff regarding augmentation in Salvation, which I'm not going to spoil for you, but that has some cool stuff in it as well that might answer some of those questions.
Is Salvation 3 or 4?
4.
4.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Rise of the Machines is 3. There we go. I know movie titles, even if I haven't seen them.
But there's some interesting augmentation things in that as well. I also agree about the technology. I think it's great the way they that it's a MacGuffin. It's an issue in a lot of movies. They addressed cell phones really well in the last Halloween movie as well.
Oh, cool.
A lot of time now you're cynical. You can't help it. You watch a classic movie and you're like, I'd just call my buddy on my cell phone, or I'd just do this. And you apply your modern thinking to OG shit, you know? Like obviously the situation that Sarah faced even in Terminator 2 is there's a lot of stuff she could have done now to help herself, you know?
Yeah. But there would have been a lot of advantages that the T-1000 would have found himself with as well.
Yeah, and I think that's something I'd love to see explored in another Terminator movie. Is the one of the things that the director Tim Miller said in his recent Q&A was that in his mind, Skynet sent out a bunch of what he called slow bullets. So the Terminator, the T-800 that you saw in Dark Fate was just one of many. And the idea
he didn't get the memo.
Yeah, and the idea that when you catch up with Sarah, she's been fighting these things nonstop. She's had no break. And there's all these other Terminators. And the idea that they've all faced different versions of Earth, different timelines and with different situations. You know, that was a thing that hooked me with Predator, the idea of these things hunting people through time as well. That was it, you know, obviously touched on in Predator 2. A Terminator that has to deal with a landline and a dial-up connection is going to have he's going to deal with a different set of issues. And I think that's really cool. The first movie had the first Terminator movie definitely had a future shock element to it. It was something like super creepy. And T2 was starting to look at Terminators in context and the idea that people wouldn't be that freaked out by some of this stuff because Skynet was starting to be a thing.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting.
And what do you allow where does the boundary go when technology advances and stuff?
Yeah, we have things now that even like my parents find like creepy future shit. The idea that the gap between us and Skynet has shrunk is in itself like a really cool story. I think it's interesting. Yeah,
and there's I don't want to get too into like theory and philosophy, but there is the theory of post-humanism and the belief that, I mean, technically if you're reading if you're reading words on a screen that someone else has written, you're already in the post-human because you don't know if a human wrote those words and put them onto a machine or if the machine generated those words. I mean, thankfully, neural nets are pretty humorous and good meme fodder currently, but like we need to work in tandem with the machines to preserve humanity. There's always this fear that we're making the thing that's going to replace the human, as opposed to like with the character of Grace, we're making the machine that's going to aid the human, and the humans and the machines play off of each other. And I think coming to that, I really liked, again, I have to say it has been such a fascinating thing going from Dark Fate and then back to T2, seeing a lot of echoes throughout, a lot of references. But when John was asking Uncle Bob if he could learn things that he was not programmed with, and it's this idea that it can learn, and he says, well, everything that I learn makes me more human. And in the first film, that's a detriment because the more human he is, the more insidious he is. But then we get to not only the T-800, who, like, I was deeply upset at the end of T2, and he's like, I cannot self-terminate. And I was like, no, please don't. Going to Carl in Dark Fate, the Terminator who didn't get the memo when Skynet was destroyed. And then the fact that then Skynet didn't exist because then they got Legion. But the fact that he was able to come to terms and cognitively kind of, I don't know how he weighs it against morality because he doesn't seem to have morality or love or emotion. But the fact that he comprehends the loss that he has impressed upon Sarah, and that causes him to change and become more human in a different way.
Yeah. I think that's well. First, it was adorable. Like it was fun.
Very serious about his drapery,
which apparently I think we discussed this, but I heard that it was an in-joke between him and Cameron.
Really?
Apparently, yeah. He's like Arnold is actually like into interior decoration and is always giving tips to Cameron, so it became like a thing.
I love that.
I hope that's true and not an internet lie.
I hope it's true too. That's amazing.
But I like the idea that in order to be a better killer, you learn, right? They all of these different Terminators across the franchise found different ways of infiltration and different ways of adapting. I love that Gabriel Luna's version of a Terminator had charm.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, he was so suave.
Yeah,
like,
that was awesome.
Like the T-1000 was dressed as a police officer, and so there's that certain degree of authority figure. But I think also in the context of the modern political climate, I thought it was interesting that in T2 they're fleeing to Mexico, and in Dark Fate they're coming out of Mexico. But oh my God, he was so suave. Like when he would just walk up and be like, yeah, we got a little bit of a problem. He did have the garments of an authority figure, but that he didn't flash the badge. He was just being nice and friendly, which was kind of freaky. I loved it.
I had a conversation recently with a horror writer, and they were talking about the idea of a horror staple is take something familiar and make it unpleasant.
The uncanny.
Right? Yeah, and it's incredible.
Yeah, and that's a whole thing about cyborgs. It's like this is something. It comes from Freudian terms, but like it comes from a German word that means home-like, and so it's from unheimlich, which is unhome-like. It's something that is so close to everything you know, but something is off, and that's what makes it abjectly terrifying. And I love that so much.
And we've talked about it, and I know, I'm sure the listeners are aware, we spend a lot of time talking about this stuff in the office.
Yeah, yes.
Things like Chucky worked so well because he was something that a child would cradle for comfort. Making that creepy is terrifying.
Michael Myers. Everyone comes to your door in a Halloween costume on Halloween. Like, you don't know what's under the mask.
What's under there, And I couldn't agree more. And each of those Terminators has a different way of, it's something familiar. And in the first one, it's literally just, it's a dude, but it's not a dude,
Surprise.
And then all the way through, they've found a new way of taking something familiar, like for a teenage kid. For a lot of us, if you're in trouble, you run to a cop, right? And I thought it was really interesting that they had a little delinquent who already had a distrust of the police that gave him his edge. Because a normal kid, and it's entirely why the T-1000 chose it. A normal kid would have been
dead.
Like, "Excuse me, officer," and that kid is dead. So it's fascinating to me that they adapted these Terminators to convey what they and Gabe Luna's Terminator is exactly what was needed at that moment. You know,
Border Patrol agent and God knows what else. I mean, the scene with when he posed as the father, and then when I think it was Grace who explained like anything that the Rev 9 comes in contact with is not going to survive the transfer, and it's just like, oh, because that was my first exposure to that, and then we get it in T2 where some of the people do kind of they stay alive, because like we get the deception with Sarah Connor at the end, which that had me like slapping the table. I was like, yes, that's so cool.
But that distinguished him very differently from the T-1000, which I thought was really interesting. Mm-hmm. Through entirely my own fault, I came into Dark Fate expecting the Rev 9 to behave like a T-1000. So the first time I watched that movie, I was constantly going, oh, that's not Sarah, that's the Rev 9. Oh, that's not. Anytime an actor left the scene, I assumed they'd been replaced. You know, because that was T2 rules. Mm-hmm. Whereas the Rev 9 didn't work that way. He didn't work the same way as a T-1000. You know, it was way more of just a relentless chase movie. Yeah. He was more of a similar to the first movie in that respect, which I found really, really interesting. And the just the idea in T2 that anyone could be the villain, and it doesn't even have to be a person. Mm-hmm. You know, when he's starting to look like the Floor and stuff like that, yeah. I was losing my mind.
Yeah, that was insane. Oh my goodness! But I think it's. I think I love all the discussion of fate, and when the T-800 says it's in your nature to destroy each other, well, it's the nature versus nurture, and we created Skynet, so who's to blame for that? And I just think there's so many beautiful, crazy questions that I'm sure we could talk for another hour about. But I do, in a twisted way, like the fact that fate, there's no fate but what we make for ourselves. And that extends to the robots, the ones that we've seen evolve either for better killing or better living, in whatever way that may be. Everyone has the option to change, and nothing seems to be set, even though it's like nothing is certain but death, taxes, and maybe a Terminator showing up. But I think it's cool that everyone in the films is given some potential to evolve, and then they choose whether that's a good or a bad thing.
Yeah, and that extends to the franchise itself. I think I have feelings about all of the Terminator movies, good and bad. I really enjoy all of them in different ways. Mm-hmm. And listening to Tim Miller talk about how this isn't a reboot, this isn't taking T2 and undoing things. It's just another timeline. Mm-hmm. It's just another opportunity for things to play out in a different way. It makes it so that I think there's no reason to ever complain. You're like, if you don't like it, follow the other timeline. Exactly, right? And that can be across all of the movies. It can be across the TV show. I'm a big fan of the Terminator comic books, and those timelines, I'm like, these are great, and they obey different rules. The comic books that I've read, I know there's many more, but the ones I've read followed the rules of T1. So there was a whole different thing going on there. You know, they kept with the idea that everything had to be wrapped in living tissue. So there's a whole bunch of cool twists in the comic books based around that I could dork out about for hours as well. But it's fascinating to me. They make rules and break rules better than any other franchise I can think of.
Yeah, because the future is not set.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
The future is not set for humanity, nor is it completely set for the Terminator franchise. With the addition of Dark Fate, however, it seems that the timeline has once again been rewritten and that there are still unexplored possibilities for the human resistance against machines. And while the Terminator films upgrade and remodel themselves over time, the endoskeleton remains the same. Relentless robots, brave human heroes, and a chance for everyone to change their mission and make their fate into what they choose. Hasta la vista, baby. This has been the Terminator Then and Now. Do you enjoy listening to Then and Now? We are proud to bring you pop culture content completely ad-free, but that doesn't mean we don't need your support to help keep us going. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting platform and help spread the word about our podcast. We welcome fan feedback. Email us at podcasts@sideshow.com with your thoughts and suggestions for how we can make our shows even better. Plus, tune in for our full network of pop culture podcasts. See if your fan favorites make the cut in the Geek Culture Countdown, a bi-weekly podcast featuring pop culture top 10 lists. Hear exclusive interviews with celebrities and pop culture industry leaders as they let their geek side show in Look Who Showed Up. Join comedian Jeff May and his special guests as they discuss anything and everything in Sideshow's Sideshow. Then get all the latest pop culture news with our daily briefing, a 2-minute breakdown of the biggest geek headlines perfect for your Alexa or Google News briefings. We wouldn't exist without your continued support. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to let your geek side show.